are you guys doing? Nope.
Right.
Hold on. Sorry. I hovered over the wrong thing quickly. All right. So it's fabulous to see all of you. I hope you're well. Again, as I said earlier, I hope the semester is off to a good start and things are finding some regularity and some routine. A few announcements.
En esta cosita.
Yep. So go.
Esta cosita. Y ahora
I'm
ya no
muting everybody. There we go. I'm the king of mute. That's my title, king of mute. Okay. So a few announcements, and then we are going to continue to move through the opening themes and discussions, because as I said on Tuesday, it's absolutely necessary that we have this kind of foundation with the concepts, with the themes, with the dynamics, so we can read The Birth of Tragedy, okay? So we're going to be in this first outline for at least 2 more lectures, okay? So we're here, and by the way, let me just say this again. This is a weird class. It really is. I mean, I'm not just being self-effacing or dramatic. It's the pacing of this class is weird, right? Because there is this information and this foundation and this context stuff that we have to talk about, period, before we can really read what's going on and understand what Nietzsche's interpretation of tragedy, why it's important, how it operates in the book, and especially how Foucault stylizes that and uses it as a critique of the Enlightenment, right? So you know, I've assigned you the Antigone tragedy and 8 pages in the attempt at self-criticism, right? And we're going to take a couple weeks to do this introductory stuff. So the pace is weird, right? We're just kind of lecture heavy at the beginning. I'm actually going to start engaging the attempt at self-criticism a little bit, just to reinforce some of these broader ideas we're talking about as we get deeper into this outline, okay? But just be patient and trust me, okay? The reading is just the Antigone and the 8 pages and the attempt at self-criticism, right? You're not missing anything. We are exactly where we're supposed to be, and this is how the class unfolds at its own kind of strange pro-seminar pace, okay? And I'll let you know when we get to the next phase, okay? So just read the attempt at self-criticism, read the Antigone, and we're still working through these big concepts for the next couple lectures, okay? So are we good? All right. We did not get to finish the last point of what we mean in this class and as Nietzsche's going to use the term Greek tragedy. And first of all, we said, and I just want to repeat this because it's critical, right? For Nietzsche, Greek tragedy, again, represents a comprehensive worldview. It represents a kind of wisdom. I know that's a kind of a strange word to use with respect to Nietzsche, right? But Greek tragedy for Nietzsche represents a kind of profound wisdom, a profound insight into life, a powerful insight and understanding and operationalization of life. And that's one of the most important things to remember when Nietzsche tells us his story about Greek tragedy in The Birth of Tragedy, when he articulates, or we articulate through the reading, what he means by the heroic or the tragic perspective, right? When he talks about who these people were, how they lived, and the art they created, Nietzsche is suggesting that this is really the pinnacle of human life. This moment represents the most sublime element of human possibility. And so Nietzsche is valorizing Greek tragedy, okay? And when we started last week and where we left, I just want to kind of rehearse that and finish it, read some passages from The Birth of Tragedy, and then go to theme 2, all right? So One, Nietzsche's valorizing Greek tragedy. There's something that these people knew, and there's something about how they lived, and there's something about the art that they created that is unmatched in human history. That's the first thing. Now, when we use the term Greek tragedy in this class and in the way that Nietzsche will use it throughout the birth of tragedy, we're always talking about three things simultaneously, okay? Kind of separate, but intertwined and operating simultaneously. So whenever we talk about Greek tragedy, we're talking about a comprehensive worldview that derives in a stylized version from the Homeric myths, specifically the first two great epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And when we're finished with these introductory remarks, we're going to have a whole fascinating lecture on that. So I'll say more about that later. Now, two, and this is where we spent the bulk of the class on Tuesday. When we talk about Greek tragedy, we're also talking about what Nietzsche will call the tragic and the heroic perspective on life. And this is really the essence of Nietzsche's view, and it's the essence of it's a power that drives the book, The Birth of Tragedy, and it becomes in some way the protean origin of Nietzsche's later postmodern philosophy. Okay, so we're going to see this throughout the course, and we're going to see even Foucault stylize this as a critique of the Enlightenment, as a kind of a deconstruction of Enlightenment metaphysics. All right, and we said very brief, I was going to go over it briefly, finish the last point about what we mean by Greek tragedy, and then continue. So the core thing here for Nietzsche and what he means by the heroic perspective, the tragic perspective. And again, at the risk of repeating myself, I just wanted to reinforce this. Nietzsche wants us to become these heroic figures. Nietzsche writes the book. Nietzsche wrote every book that he wrote, right? Nietzsche intends through the book, through the challenge the books give to us, give to you, to seduce you into becoming these heroic people, into adopting a kind of tragic, heroic perspective. And Nietzsche thinks it's a superior perspective. And again, more on that later. Now, so again, what's he talking about when he talks about this tragic or heroic perspective? And it really hangs on 4 or 5 key points, right? As we said last week, and we're going to unpack them as we go through the class. In and of itself, the world has no inherent meaning, value, or purpose. There is no objectively true meaning in the cosmos, meaning in one's mind, value in the cosmos, purpose to the cosmos, right? For Nietzsche and his reading of how he understood the Greek tragics and how it will inform his notion of post-metaphysical or postmodern thinking later, right? In and of itself, the world has no inherent meaning, purpose, or value or purpose, right? It just, there are all sorts of things and processes. Things are real, but they're not true. They don't have inherent meaning. And there's all sorts of things, processes, and dynamics that are the effects of causes that have nothing to do with human mind, right? And so in and of itself, the world is real. There's stuff out there, it's real. There are processes happening, right? It's the world, the worldliness and the meaning, whatever's out there isn't an imagination. It's not a figment of our imagination. This isn't a head in a jar kind of thing, imagining it, right? There are real things out there. There are planets and stars and processes and dynamics, and they're real. But in and of themselves, they don't possess meaning. They don't possess value. They don't possess purpose. 2, all meaning, value, and purpose are human inventions, right? They are inventions of human mind. And for Nietzsche, mostly through language, primarily through language. And we're going to talk about that later. So for Nietzsche, and as he understands the tragic Greeks, meaning is a human invention. Value is a human invention. Purpose is a human invention. Now, it's an existentially essential invention, because without it, things aren't differentiated. Things don't mean things. Things aren't differentiated. The world has no worldliness to it. So it's existentially essential. But it is, at the end of the day, artificial. It's artificial. Literally, in the literal meaning of that word, something is artificial because it doesn't exist in nature, or objectively or metaphysically. It's artificial. Meaning is artificial. Value is artificial. Purpose is artificial. It's existentially essential, but it is nonetheless artificial. Now, because the world and life has no inherent objective foundational meaning or value or purpose, because that has to be invented. And by the way, those of you who had 414, there was that beautiful passage in the first essay, right, where Nietzsche's talking about the origin of meaning, the origin of value, right? And he said he starts in language, and he says the lordly right to give names, to invent the word, to give the word meaning, and to assign to that word and that meaning a value in the hierarchy of relationships, both human and political. Nietzsche says that is the origin of meaning, to seize the right to give a name, to give that name a meaning, and to give that name / meaning a value. That's the origin, right? And that's a human invention, to seize the right to give the name. And Nietzsche will say these heroic individuals, and in the genealogy of morals, he calls them the aristocrats. Those are the people that opened the meaningfulness of the world. They gave the world meaning. They gave their life meaning. They gave others meaning. They gave it value. And in a fascinating way, opened up the meaningfulness of the world. The world is no longer real but not meaningful. Now it's meaningful. And Nietzsche said it's not only a human invention, but in the act of asserting the name. Nick Dungy gives the name. Nick Dungy gives the meaning. Nick Dungy gives the value. Now, look, in the context of the class, Nietzsche's going to say, who was the first person in Western culture to assign the name? Who was the first person in Western culture to give the value?
Socrates?
Nope. Homer. Right? Right? Because what we call Western culture, what we call the Greek world, was an invention that was derived, asserted out of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Again, more on that later. I'm giving you an example to kind of show the point Nietzsche's talking about. For Nietzsche, the Greek world, Western culture, that was a human what?
Invention.
Yeah,
Construct.
Yeah, construct. Wonderful, Genesis. It's an invention, it's a construct. Now, again, just to drive this point so we can move on. Because the world has no inherent meaning or definition or value, the giving of it is not just existentially essential. It's not just in invention. It is also simultaneously and forever, inescapably an assertion of what? Power. This is the key, right? To give the name, to give the definition, to assign the purpose is not only the highest form of art, inventiveness, right? And by the way, ultimately, you guys have to learn to give your life what?
Meaning.
You have to learn to give it value. By the way, for two reasons. Because the current economic and political paradigm that has assigned you your meaning and your value and what you're going to do in your job and why you're going to be civil, that whole damn paradigm is coming what?
Apart.
It's coming apart, Jacob. Beautiful. Right? In fact, we are witnessing the collapse of our structures and systems of meaning. We're not in college anymore in person. Now we're all on Zoom. artificial intelligence is going to wipe out most of what you guys expected to do. And when it wipes out what you expected to do, it's going to destroy your valuation. Soon all of you, are going to have to begin an extraordinarily heroic process that is going to be forced upon you by the tragic collapse of this system of meaning and value and reference and purpose. You're going to be forced to begin the process, or you're going to suffer. Your soul is going to die. You're going to be forced to begin the process of having to now redefine the meaning of your life, the value of your life. So the assertion of me, the giving of the name, the giving of the meaning and the value, that is always already an exercise of power. Meaning and power are simultaneous. This is critical. Now, moving through these more quickly so we can get to the stuff we need to talk about. Now, 3, because meaning is a human invention and an assertion of power. And I'm thinking in a kind of abstract sense, so bear with me here, right? Because that meaning and the giving of the value and the assertion of that as a type of power, that meaning is thrown into a world that in and of itself doesn't have it. In fact, it's thrown into a world or over an abyss that may be resistant to it. Right? Humans have to create the word. We have to create the definition. We have to open the space of value and purpose so we can live, so we can be heroic, so we can build empires and build cities and make love and raise families. But at the end of the day, that whole project is in and of itself inescapably, essentially fragile. It has to be. And it has to be for 2 reasons, probably more, but at least 2 for now. 1, because at some point you and I are all going to what? You're going to die. Yeah, Jacob. That's right. Thanks, Jacob. And got some theater going there. We're going to die. We're mortal. We're mortal. As Sartre said, there's no exit. We're mortal. We're going to die. Our projects are going to die. No amount of technological power or wealth or science is going to enable, no amount of human invention understood as technology or science or medicine or wealth, no amount of human invention is going to allow Nick Denji to transcend his death. And again, that's part of the tragic and the tragedy. It's finite. And not only is it fragile because I die, we die, but it's also finite because the fact that people are doing this, and the fact that lots of people are doing this, and the fact that heroic people are doing this, and other heroic people are doing this, it creates this kind of extraordinarily agonistic context. This is a kind of a heroic, this is in a weird way, a fight club in a way. Right? People, and by the way, you don't have to be Nietzschean to know this. In fact, this is happening to all of us all the time. We don't think of it like this. Right? Life is a space of a contest over meaning, over a contest over how things will be valued. You're in that space of conflicted relationships all the time. You know it. Right? In a weird way, that's what bullying is. If you've been in social and political scenes and spaces where somebody is trying to impose a meaning on you or a definition, to marginalize, oppress, harm, or hurt, to assign value, first of all, you know what that is. You're in it. And you know what your options are. You can either accept it and live in the shadows, submit. That's right. I am those things that you say. You're right. I'm unlovable, ugly, too stupid, wrong color, wrong gender, wrong sexual. You're fucking right. You're right. Fuck. You can submit, or you can what?
Change.
Huh. Give me a better word for change.
Resist.
Resist. Resist. By resisting the definition, resisting the imposition of meaning and value and worth. Resist the fucking closets. So you guys are doing this already. You just don't think of it in a Nietzschean sense. In fact, you think of it in a metaphysical sense, which in some ways is still useful, but it cripples you at the end of the day. So meaning is fragile. One, because you and I die, our projects die. And two, whatever meaning and value we are inventing and inserting is happening in a very contested, agonistic space. And by the way, this is also part of the heroic journey. You live or die in this space. You become heroic or you become a slave in this space. Period. And then two, or the 2.5 or 3, the third reason it's fragile is because the cosmos is massive. Whatever life is, whatever the forces of life, the cosmic forces of life are, no amount of human language or technology and nuclear power and green energy, medical sciences, cloning, no amount of power, linguistic power, technological power will ever enable you to master the cosmos. It will never enable you to master your death, and it'll never enable you to master the cosmos. So it's fragile. It's fragile. Now 3, because it's fragile, this is where we were, we're almost getting to where we can start again with the lecture. Because it's fragile, that means, and it always means, it always already and never stops meaning this until you die. That because it's fragile, it's always a heartbeat. It's always one word. It's always one moment away from doing what?
Falling apart.
Breaking.
Collapsing.
Great, yeah, love you guys, coming apart. Absolutely right. The mind comes apart. People, and again, I'm not being dramatic. I'm being sincere. Think about the way people now have anxiety attacks. Think about what we now have a center at CSUN designed entirely to help people with anxiety and anxiety attacks and panic attacks. And thank God we do. Fuck. But you think about what a panic attack is. What is a panic? And by the way, if you've had them, you know what they are. What is a panic attack? What is an acute anxiety or panic attack?
It's an overload moment.
Yep. And what happens in the overload moment?
Your heart rate accelerates and it becomes difficult to breathe. Just everything feels like it's closing in.
What happens to your mind?
Function.
Yeah, love you. What happens to your mind?
It falls apart. You can't function. You can't think straight. You just cannot function.
It disintegrates. The mind disintegrates. The content, the words and the meaning and the value, the content in your mind that holds everything together, that holds Nick Dungy together, that holds my purpose, that holds my schedule, that holds my valuation, that holds the people up, that holds it all together, that whole field of relationships does what? It comes apart. Can't think, can't speak. The thing that Plato told you was there and stable and objective and metaphysical, that thing can come apart. There's nothing underneath it. And when it comes apart, you're staring into the what?
Abyss.
Into the abyss. You're staring into the abyss. It's fragile. The mind is fragile. The life, the mortality of the physical life is fragile. The political space is fragile. I've been teaching modern political philosophy for 25 years. This class and postmodern, modern political philosophy for 25 years. And for 20, especially in the modern, 412, I've said for 25 years, the great paradox of the human political experiment is that on the one hand, it seems extraordinarily stable, as it claims to be rooted in these metaphysical ideas like natural right and equality and the freedom, the autonomy of the individual and the sanctity of human mind and reason coming together in a democratic experience. It was given this kind of metaphysical draping, this metaphysical clothing, and for 250 years and through the Civil War and the two world wars and the wars in Southeast Asia and through the Great Cold War. And with this exploding abundance of capitalism and post-capitalism and the service economy, now the information economy, it all seems so immovable. It seems so metaphysical. It seems so permanent. And I've said for 25 years, the extraordinary paradox of America is that, yeah, okay, there's a kind of continuity here. There's a kind of, it feels like there's a kind of permanence. There's plenty of food. The electricity works. We've survived some world wars. But at the other end, America is an extraordinarily fragile place. It's hovering over an abyss because it's built on a handshake. It's built on a kind of social contract handshake. And it's fragile. It's a human invention. The Constitution is a human invention. There's a human invention and an assertion of power that we sustained in a kind of chaotic, fragile global space and universe. And now it's coming apart. In fact, there is technically no more America anymore. There's an asymmetric, sophisticated, information-driven civil war happening right now. There's no America. There's no America because the tolerance that made America is gone. There's just hatred now. It's fragile. It's done. We're already kind of hovering in the abyss, just kind of like arranging the chairs on the Titanic. It's fragile. The mind is fragile. The body is fragile. The social and political space is fragile. Why are they fragile? Because they're human inventions. They're assertions of power. And they're difficult to keep together. And they come apart. And they're going to come apart several times. And we're talking big ideas right now, but there's lots of small coming apart. A divorce is a small coming apart. The death of a child, a profound coming apart. Getting a 50 on the LSAT, the shattering of your conception of your mind and your value and what your future was going to be, like a coming apart. Things come apart. There are limits to your power. There are limits to your power, my power, our control.
Professor?
There are going to be things that come that you don't see coming, and there's nothing you can do. COVID is one. Last March, who in the hell thought that there would be no graduation? Who in the hell thought there would be no continuity of the extravagance of the American way of life? Things come apart. This is the tragic of the tragic perspective. Minds come apart, bodies die, political and social systems come unraveled. There's nothing metaphysical holding them together. There's nothing foundation, there's no promise. There's no promise that things hang together. And again, and by the way, if there's something that Socrates and Nietzsche do agree about, it is precisely that philosophy prepares you for that fragility. They think of it in different ways, to be sure. But it's a reminding of the fragility. Now, 4, when things come apart and you survive, you have 2 choices. You can be crushed by it, or you can understand the fragility of language, of the word, of the meaning, of the value. You can say to yourself, that was something that was too important, to be sure. Absolutely, it was important. People live and die for these things. But if they happen, if they fade, if for some tragic reason, something beyond your control, those dreams, those expectations, those great loves, those empires, if they come crashing down, the 4th part of this kind of heroic perspective is you and I have to find the emotional strength and the intellectual creativity. And I use the word creativity purposely. We have to find this fierce emotional strength and a kind of mental creativity, an intellectual creativity to give the world a new name, to give one's life a new name, to give one's name and life value. And in doing that, give it a purpose. That's what Nietzsche means by the heroic perspective. And he thinks that perspective better equips us to live in the world as it is. That's the key. Metaphysics does not prepare us to live in the world as it is. More on that later. Okay? Now, I've asked you to read or start to read The Attempt at Self-Criticism. And it's very hard to penetrate if we haven't had any background to some of these bigger concepts that Nietzsche is talking about. So now that we've gotten through the first 2 elements of what it means by Greek tragedy, when we use the word Greek tragedy, we're talking about a comprehensive worldview. We're going to fill that out later. And we're also talking about what Nietzsche calls a heroic perspective, a tragic perspective, built on these kind of 4 awarenesses about life and meaning and fragility and death and the importance of renaming, redefining, revaluing, reinventing, right? And to kind of link this to a passage in the Attempt at Self-Criticism, just so you get a sense that when you start reading The Attempt at Self-Criticism, this is what he's talking about. It's a beautiful passage. And by the way, when we're done with all of this, we're going to read The Attempt at Self-Criticism again before we start reading the book. So we're going to be dealing with this several times, so don't worry. But in The Attempt at Self-Criticism, on the first page, Nietzsche writes, music and tragedy, Greeks, and the music of tragedy. The most accomplished, right? And as I said earlier, Nietzsche valorizes the Greeks of the tragic age, okay? And he writes, speaking of these Greeks of this heroic perspective, these Greeks of the tragic age, the Greeks of Aeschylus and Sophocles, the most accomplished, the most beautiful, the most universally envied group of human beings, envied race of mankind, those most capable of seducing us into life, he writes. They were the ones who needed tragedy, or even more art. What for? Greek art. Right? And so already in that passage, right, you get this sense that this perspective produces people who know, who are aware that in and of itself the world has no inherent meaning or purpose. That meaning and value and purpose are heroic human inventions and assertions of power. That even under the best conditions, the things that we create, the loves we undertake, the empires we build, the lives we construct, even under the best of circumstances, those are inherently, essentially, and inescapably fragile things. But it doesn't terrify them. It doesn't cripple them. They know it. And despite what they know, despite the fact that they know how it ends, what do? They live their life every damn day, every damn minute, consciously aware and intensely engaged in this idea that my existential responsibility is to give my life meaning, to give it value, and to be prepared to resist those that want to impose their meaning, to impose their value on me in an attempt to oppress, marginalize, cripple, and enslave. And you show up every day until you don't. And that's it. They need it. They understand what is happening. They understand where they are. They understand the world they live in. They do not say, why me? This is unjust. I wish I were never born. They know where they are. They know how it ends. And they live heroic lives anyways. In fact, in spite of it, that's the point. Now, the third way that we think, that we use the term Greek tragedy, when we talk about Greek tragedy, worldview, heroic perspective, and the third way, when we use the word Greek tragedy, we mean it in the sense that we mean it. It's a play. We mean it. We refer to it as examples of cultural production, examples of art. So the Antigone. The Antigone is an example of Greek tragedy. Now, for Nietzsche, the Antigone, Aeschylus, the surviving plays by Aeschylus, Sophocles, the Antigone for Nietzsche, is the epitome of human artistic ability. Greek tragedy, this tragedy that I've asked you to read, is the zenith of human artistic achievement, because Greek tragedy tells, I use truth in a small t here, not metaphysical. Greek tragedy tells the truth about life, but does so beautifully. Greek tragedy spiritualizes tragedy. Right? The Antigone tells you the truth about life, but it does so beautifully. It does so erotically. It does so powerfully. So when we use the term Greek tragedy, when we use it in the sense that Nietzsche is going to be using it, and by the way, can I slide something in here right now? I usually don't bring this up until we get into the birth of tragedy, like into the first book itself, but we're here, and I want to just breach this issue. because it's related to this kind of scene we're setting up now. I say, look, in the class, when Nietzsche uses the term Greek tragedy, he's using it in three simultaneous ways. Worldview, a kind of a description of a heroic perspective, tragic heroic perspective, and as an actual examples of art, of cultural production, the damn play itself, the Antigone. And one part of that bigger picture that we spent Tuesday on, I've wasted too much time again, I'm sorry, on this issue today, but it's so damn important. A critical element of that is the realization, is the conscious realization, right? And not just a conscious realization, the sort of taking on the responsibility for living this way, that meaning is a human what? Invention. It's an assertion of power. That behind that invention, behind that power, there's no fucking truth. There's no pure origin. There's no discovery of that is the way it really was. And forgive me if I sound a little kind of difficult to follow right now, but this is really a critical point. Nietzsche, when Nietzsche writes the book, The Birth of Tragedy, and he tells us this story about the tragic Greeks, do you think Nietzsche thinks that he's telling us the truth about the tragic Greeks?
No, because he invented it.
Yeah, love you. I don't know who said that.
Sam.
Yeah, fabulous. Who said it, Pam?
Samantha.
Oh, Samantha. I was like, I can't see. I'm senile. I can't fucking hear anymore. Don't turn 50. That's my advice. That's my advice for this class. Don't turn 50. That's right. Samantha's right on it. Nietzsche's going to argue that the Greek world, and by the way, he's kind of right about, that the Greek world was a human invention. It's a human invention of Homer. We're going to talk about more of that next week. Prior to the Iliad and the Odyssey, and prior to the emergence of this worldview and these general norms about power and aristocracy and courage and masculinity and gender norms and the gods, there were lots of people living around what we call the Greek Peloponnese and Western Turkey, Southern Italy, all the way up to Croatia, where we have our summer house. There are lots of people living. Of course, thousands of years people living, even people kind of in a weird way communicating and trading. But those people didn't think of themselves as what?
As Greek.
As Greek. Beautiful, Christina. They didn't think of themselves as Greek. There was no map of the Greek world. Being Greek, the Greek world from which Western civilization emerges. It's a human what?
Invention, construct.
Invention. And therefore an assertion of what?
Power.
Power. Western civilization is a poem. It emerges out of a poem. The Iliad and the Odyssey, the great epic poems. It's an invention. It's an assertion of power. It's essential. It's epic. It's fucking beautiful. But it's not objectively what?
True.
True. It's a poem. And so Nietzsche's sitting here in the 1870s. He's a young professor. He's 24. He's 26 when the book comes out. He's a boy genius, boy prodigy. He's already got his PhD. He's already the chair at Basel, one of the most prestigious philosophy departments in all of Europe. He's 26 years old. Child genius prodigy. This is his first book. It ended his career, by the way. Nietzsche's life come apart at 26. Nietzsche's entire life, his career, his value, his social standing, the crowd he rolled with, the Wagner crowd he rolled with, it all came apart. At 28, Nietzsche was suicidal. It was done. His whole life was done at 28 because of this book, because he had the audacity to write this book. Took a sledgehammer to the European understanding of itself. Cost him his job. But the book, in the book, Nietzsche is telling us, Nietzsche's saying, I'm going to tell you my story. I'm going to tell you my version of the tragic Greeks. I'm going to tell you my poem of the poem. Nowhere in this book does Nietzsche pretend to be telling us the truth of the tragic Greeks. He's telling us his what?
His invention, his story.
Yeah, his interpretation. He's hoping to seduce us into his interpretation. And by the way, that idea fits into this whole other idea we were talking about earlier. So sorry if I've got too many ideas floating around. Again, I'm senile and I can't keep my head straight anymore. You guys deserve your money back. That idea fits into the other idea that again, because meaning's a human invention, because it is an assertion of power, because that happening it takes place in a world that has no meaning. It takes place in a world where whatever meaning exists is highly contested because other people are on planet Earth trying to assert, right, their meaning, their value. And by the way, a lot of those people are trying to impose it on you. Right? It's kind of fragility. The speaking, meaning, value asserting, existentially essential, but something that is just inescapably fragile. And by the way, that's the power of it. That's the exit. That's the exit from nihilism. It is precisely because the very structures of meaning, whether it's in your head, who you think you are, or in what you think your value is, or what you think your gender is, or what you think your purpose is, it is precisely because those things aren't real that you can liberate yourself. And it's precisely, that's the opening. That's the rip into the system, a kind of plane in the abyss, and the reinvention. It's precisely because those things aren't true that you can be free. That's the point. In a weird way, if you needed to be kind of savage about metaphysics, right? If Plato's right, and there is an objectively true self, as Plato wrote in the Republic. And by the way, there's a real Nick Dungy. And as Plato wrote, Christianity has its own version of this. Now, science has perfected this in this weird dystopian way about health and normality and normal sexuality and normal parenting and normal child development. We're sick. But if all those things are true, if, according to Plato, nature really did implant your talent, what you're supposed to do, if the Christians are right or the Muslims are right, God puts you in this world to do just this. This is who you are. You can't change it. It's who you are. You're put here to do this. Or now in science, yeah, you are biochemically fucked up. You have ADHD. You've got learning disabilities, and you're dysfunctional. You're abnormal. We've got to therapeutically fix you, or medically fix you, chemically fix you. If those things are right, there's no freedom. There's no exit. You are who you are. And who you are is rooted in some cosmic truth, some metaphysical truth of Plato's just soul, or the Christian conception of so what it means to be a moral person. Read the book, shut up. And now science. You're depressed? We're going to fix you here. It's 1,000 milligrams. There you go. Let's make you fucking happy. Let's make you behave. Let's make you obedient. That's the tragedy. One more passage and we'll call it a day. Bottom of page 3. And just roll with me right now with the word pessimism, okay? Nietzsche means the word in a way that is different from how we typically use the word. And I don't have time to explain it, but we will when we read the whole passage, the whole attempt at self-criticism later. So just bear with me, okay? Nietzsche writes, again, talking about why these people needed tragedy. What is it that they knew? And what did what they know empower them and liberate them and make them emotionally fierce and intellectually creative? And Nietzsche writes, let me just say this so it's readable. When he uses the word pessimism in the passage I'm about to read, he means realism. He means realism. He means pessimism as realism. Okay? Again, we'll talk about that later. It's a little awkward, I know, but just trust me. So let me rearrange that first sentence so it reads properly. Is there strength in a kind of realism? And what he meant by realism is this tragic perspective, knowing that the world has no inherent meaning, knowing that meaning is an invention, an assertion of power, knowing that it's fragile, knowing that you've got to spend your life either creating or resisting, and knowing that you're going to die and you fucking do it anyways. That's what he means. Is there strength in that realism, in knowing how the world really is? Is there strength there? And yes, this is it's a rhetorical question. Yes, there is. Is there strength in awareness of how the world is? And then he goes on, and this is what's beautiful. This is what we've lost. Some of you have it because I know you, and I see the fire in your eyes, and I see what you're doing now. But culturally, we've lost this, and we've lost this for thousands of years. This is what Nietzsche thinks we've lost. He says, is there strength in the awareness of what life is? An intellectual predilection, a kind of craving, an intellectual awareness, an intellectual predilection for what is hard, what is terrible, problematic in existence, arising from well-being, overflowing health, the abundance of existence. Is it perhaps possible to suffer from overabundance? And here's the beautiful line. A tempting and challenging, sharp-eyed courage that craves the terrible as one craves the enemy, the worthy enemy, against whom it can test its strength. What is the meaning for those Greeks of the best, strongest, most courageous age of the tragic myth? Do you know where you are, who you are, how it ends, and are you still willing to celebrate life, to affirm it joyously, erotically, and passionately, and to spend every day until you don't have a day anymore, giving it meaning, value, and purpose? and being prepared to resist those who wish to impose it on you, and in doing so marginalize you and oppress you, harm you, define you, cripple you, to own your soul. All right. Have a great weekend. I will see you on Tuesday, and we will do point 2 of this introductory outline.
Thank you, Nick.
Yep, love you guys.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Unconditionally. This is love.
Thank you, Professor. Have a nice weekend.
Yep,
Thank
take care,
you.
you guys.
Bye. Take care.